This is our first unit in applied safety engineering, and that first unit is Introduction to Safety Engineering. But I thought it might be a good idea to go back and start with a brief discussion of safety management. What is safety management? For some of you, this may be the first class you've taken in our program. Maybe you don't have any knowledge of what safety management is all about. Now, I understand for some of you, you've heard this before in other classes. This will be a repeat. Bear with me. Remember, we learn through repetition. The more we hear something, the more likely we are to remember it. So repetition is not a bad thing. Okay, this is primarily for you guys who haven't had much background with safety management already, who are just starting the program, who are just kind of, stepping through that door into the world of safety management. Now, in this video lecture, and this should be a brief one, I'm thinking, we're going to talk about what is safety management, just very basic description of safety management. Then we're going to talk about the responsibilities and qualities of a safety professional, of a safety manager. So let's go ahead and get started. What do we mean by safety management? There are a lot of different ways you can define safety management, but I like this definition. I like thinking of it in this way. Safety management is a system of policies and practices exercised by a company, and the goal of these policies and practices is to prevent loss incidents or to prevent problems for the company. A company's policies and practices to prevent bad things happening. And those bad things, usually we talk about loss incidents in safety when we talk about bad things. A loss incident could be an injury, fatality, property damage, financial loss from lawsuits. It could even be employee theft. And some safety managers may have that responsibility to come up with policies to prevent employee theft. Or it could be you're coming up with policies to prevent shoplifting, depending on what industry you end up in. But now the bad things, though, that can happen, it's not just these loss incidents. We also have government agencies that we have to comply with. So our policies and practices should also ensure that we are in compliance with all government regulations that apply to our operations, to our business. Third-party safety, and this kind of goes along with lawsuits, is also an important concern for safety management. If we have a business that serves customers, if we have customers coming in and out of our business, we don't want those customers to be injured. If we are a trucking company, we don't want the operations of our trucking company to injure other drivers out on the highway. That's one of the worst things that can happen to a company. Now, safety management and the goal of safety management is going to vary from industry to industry. Some industries will have different risks or hazards or focal points than other industries. But generally speaking, we're talking about policies and practices to prevent loss incidents, to prevent bad things from happening, to prevent problems with government regulatory agencies. Now, a safety professional or a safety manager, just very simply speaking, is an individual or individuals with responsibility for implementing and evaluating the safety management system, for implementing the policies and practices, for evaluating, observing, monitoring, make sure they're working properly. The safety professional may also be involved with creating policies and creating different practices that intend to prevent loss incidents. We'll talk more about safety, the safety manager, and what they do and their characteristics before we're through with this. Lecture, but this gives us a footing to move on in our discussion. Now, there are two common approaches to safety management that I need to mention. The first is referred to as a risk-based approach. A risk-based approach is a proactive approach focused on identifying hazards and risks in advance. The goal is to prevent loss incidents. The goal is prevention. Prevention is the goal. Some companies, this is their management approach. They want to prevent losses. That's the whole reason they have a safety management system, is to prevent losses. And you may be thinking, well, duh, isn't that what all companies are about when it comes to safety management? Sadly, it's not. And I'll talk about that other approach or this other philosophy on the next slide. Now, complying with the law in a risk-based approach or a risk-based system is also important, but it's not the primary objective. We do have to comply with OSHA regulations, DOT regulations, regulations of other government agencies, but that's not the primary goal. The primary goal is prevention. And usually these companies that take a risk-based approach in their management system, they go far, far beyond what OSHA requires. They don't really care what OSHA requires. They want to do whatever is necessary to prevent loss. And because they are so focused on doing it the right way, that they are going to be at least compliant with OSHA regulations, and most of the time they're going to exceed those OSHA regulations. And for those of you, I'm talking about OSHA here. I probably should define what OSHA is for some of you who are just getting started. OSHA is the federal agency that sets workplace safety regulations and enforces workplace safety regulations. OSHA is the agency that can come into a business and do an inspection and issue a citation and fine the company. Very simple. I mean, I could do a whole hour and a half just on what OSHA is all about. But for the sake of this discussion, OSHA is the government agency that regulates workplace safety. They set the regulations and they enforce regulations on workplace safety. This risk-based approach that is proactive, that's focused on prevention, this is sometimes referred to as a world-class system. A system that focuses on this goal of prevention, that's often referred to or indicative of what is referred to as a world-class safety management system. This is what companies should aspire to. Which again makes a lot of sense coming from our standpoint. That's what we should be about. But there are some companies out there, prevention is not really their goal. They may say it is, but it's really not. It's really not their goal. They are more of a compliance-based safety management system. That's the other type of management system that we can talk about. Risk-based, compliance-based. This is reactive. It reacts to bad things as they happen. It doesn't try to prevent them. It reacts to incidents as they occur. They are focused primarily on those legal requirements, on the OSHA regulations, the DOT regulations. Maybe the Department of Homeland Security has some regulations that they have to comply with. EPA is another big one. EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. Companies want to do just the bare minimum to comply with these regulations. They're not, and I think sometimes they fool themselves into thinking that if they comply with the regulations, then all the bad stuff's going to be prevented. But that's not the case. There are a lot of companies out there who are complying with the regulations, but they still have the injuries, the fatalities, the property damage. In my experience, the first two companies I worked for were primarily compliance-based, and we still had issues. Upper management would not take that next step to a more risk-based preventative approach. Everything was about, I even had one upper manager, one of my bosses, say that he was okay as long as let me back up a little bit. He was okay if we received OSHA citations as long as they weren't serious OSHA citations. That was his standard for safety, which is a really low bar. And there are companies out there like this, a lot of companies like this. It's possible you could end up working for a company like that has a compliance-based approach. And it's not the end of the world if that happens, but it's going to be a little bit harder. Your job's going to be a little bit harder. And what a safety manager in that situation will do ideally is try to push the company toward more of a preventative approach, that risk-based approach. Again, like I've said, compliance approach is usually not focused on prevention. Management only gets, when I talk about this a lot of times I'll talk about management only gets excited about safety when something bad happens. There's a horrible vehicular accident that happened that affected the company, and the company's in the middle of lawsuits now. Well, that's when management sees that safety is important. That's when they want to get serious about doing it differently, and they'll push for new policies and new procedures. But with a compliance-based reactive management system, that usually disappears after a few months. After 5 or 6 months, it goes back to business as usual, focused on staying out of trouble with OSHA or the DOT or the EPA. So, very, very general overview of safety management and these two different approaches. And do let me know if you have any questions or comments with regard to these different approaches or anything I've said so far in our discussion. Let's talk about safety pro responsibilities, or the responsibilities of a safety manager. Again, this is just a very rough outline. We could spend, or actually what you're learning in this program, every class in this program is teaching you about the responsibilities of a safety professional, of a safety manager. So I'm summarizing all of your coursework into one slide here to give you a better understanding of the type of job you'll be doing as a safety manager. One of the things safety managers spend a lot of time doing is preparing safety plans, doing what we call hazard analysis or risk assessment. And we're going to talk a lot about hazard analysis and the risk assessment in the next couple of weeks, because that's an important part of safety engineering. It involves critical thinking, more than looking at regulations. Preparing a hazard analysis requires identifying what is in the workplace that could cause harm and coming up with a plan for eliminating whatever that hazard might be. That involves critical thinking. And there's a lot more that goes into it also. And again, when we get to the hazard analysis topic, we'll spend quite a bit of time talking about hazard analysis. I think it's maybe the most important thing we do as safety managers is this critical thinking, identifying hazards, and coming up with plans to control those hazards. We do a lot of training as safety managers. We have all of these policies and safe operating procedures that we develop. That's part of our safety management system. Well, we have the job of making sure that management and workers understand those policies, those procedures. Also understand the government regulations. A lot of the training out there for safety professionals is like the OSHA 10 and the OSHA 30 or other OSHA-based classes that are focused on training on the regulations. But again, good companies conduct training way beyond just what the OSHA regulations require. Depending on the company you work for, you may end up spending a lot of your time meeting with management, persuading them to do this, that, or the other, persuading them to make improvements. And that goes back to building relationships. You got to have a good relationship with the people you're trying to persuade. If the person you're trying to persuade doesn't trust you, if you don't have credibility with them because they don't know who you are, then it's going to be hard for you to persuade them. Also persuading the workers out on the factory floor or out on the construction site. This also involves building relationships, maybe even more so than persuading upper management. To get workers to listen to what you're saying, I think the most important thing is for them to know that you care about them, that you've built that relationship, and they understand that you are not there to get them in trouble, but you are there to make their life better, to make their job easier, to make their job safer, that you are there so they go home every evening to their families, or at the end of each shift to their families. Making observations in the workplace to make sure that people are working safely, making sure that the safety plans are being followed. Another term for observation that's commonly used here is inspection. And another term that goes along with inspection is audit. I don't really like those terms because inspection and audit, that tends to carry a negative connotation. Now, he's coming in, he's going to audit me. And what happens in an audit? Bad things come out of audits. Or he's going to come in and inspect me. Bad things come out of inspections. But as safety managers, we're not there. We're there to prevent bad things. We're not there to make life miserable for the workers and for other members of management, for the production side. So I like to use the term observations. We monitor, we observe, we recommend corrective actions. We don't demand corrective actions. We recommend corrective actions. We coach them. We work with them to bring about the changes that we think need to be made. Taking a more proactive approach, a more positive approach. And 30 years ago, the safety management world, it was all about the rules and regulations and going in and writing somebody up and putting somebody on probation or suspending them or firing them in some cases if they weren't following the rules. Well, there's still a place for some of that, but a lot of that old heavy-handed safety cop approach to safety has disappeared, replaced by a more positive approach, working with production, working with other managers, working with the workers to make sure everything is good for everybody. Now, these observations, we will be looking at regulations and laws. Are we complying with the regulations and laws? We're going to be looking for areas where we can recommend corrective actions. And in some cases, if it is what we call an imminent danger, where if something's not done immediately, somebody could be severely injured, we might have to issue a stop work order in those cases of imminent danger. But a lot of things can come out of the observations that we make in the workplace. And another thing I'll say about the observations we make in the workplace, I said preparing safety plans is an important part of what we do. It takes a lot of our time. Being out where the work is taking place is also very important and takes a lot of our time. This is one profession where you're not going to be real successful if you spend all of your time in the office. If you spend all of your time in the office, you're probably going to have problems within your facility, within your company. We need to be out there working with the workers, monitoring. And working with the workers and being out there in the workplace also includes training as well. So let me move on. I could go an hour on any of these points, and I'm trying to just keep this very basic introduction to what safety management's all about. Another thing that we do as safety managers, when there is an incident, we try to prevent everything, but it's just about impossible to prevent everything. When there is an incident, an injury, or a property loss, we're involved with the incident investigation. We're involved with making sure the injured worker gets the medical care that they need. In some cases, we may be involved with providing first aid. Another thing that goes along with incidents for a lot of companies is drug testing. A lot of companies have the policy that anytime there's an incident, there's a post-incident drug screen. And usually that's the safety manager that gets to deal with this. If the incident involves a third party, if our company's operation injures someone in the public that's not part of that operation, then we might have to deal with those third-party complaints. One of the things that I used to have to deal with a lot, I worked for a construction company that had a lot of trucks on the highway. And these trucks were coming in and out of construction sites, and they were picking up rocks. They get out on the highway, and they throw these rocks into somebody's windshield. I was there for probably 2 years until we got it squared away. We got some corrective actions in place to prevent it. There for a couple of years, it seemed like once a week someone was calling about their windshield being broken. And that's just one example, and it depends on your industry. Some industries, it might be different types of complaints from different types of third-party incidents, but that could take up some of your time and be part of your responsibility as a safety manager. Purchasing, budgeting. We also are involved with purchasing safety-related items, fall protection gear, hard hats, respirators. When you're first starting out as a safety manager, you may not have that much purchasing responsibility, but as you grow into the position, as you get more experience and your bosses learn that you're someone who can be trusted, you'll have purchasing responsibilities. You might have to keep inventories of items so that you always have what you need on hand when it's needed. Now, these are just some of the responsibilities. Let me know if you have any comments, any questions. If you ever want to know anything about safety management, let me know. Let's talk about some of the characteristics of a person who would be well suited to safety management. And that would be most people, I think. I think most people could become a safety manager and be successful as a safety manager. Critical thinking ability is important. The ability to look at a situation and see what's wrong with that situation and come up with a solution. Going back to hazard analysis. Hazard analysis is a great example of the critical thinking we do as safety professionals. Being able to work with people. This gets overlooked in a lot of our textbooks. You hardly ever see it discussed. But when you talk to 100 safety managers experience that are out there in the field, ask them what's the most important thing about their job, they're going to more than likely talk about working with other people, being able to develop relationships, earn their trust, persuade people to work more safely. I think it's just about, as far as the skills or characteristics, maybe it's the most important thing. And there will be other safety managers who would disagree with me on that. But in my experience, in the construction industry, if you don't have the trust of the workers you're working with, then all of the rest of it's not going to work if you don't have their trust. You got to have that trust. You got to build that relationship first. Public speaking. If you're not a good public speaker or you're not comfortable with public speaking at this time, that's okay. You can become a better speaker, and you can become more comfortable with public speaking. Public speaking, just like anything else, the more you do it, the better you get at it, and the more comfortable you become with it. But public speaking is something that you need to be able to do in this profession. You'll need to be able to speak in meetings with management. You'll need to be able to do public speaking in the training room when you're doing different types of training. You'll need to be able to speak to small groups out in the workplace. A lot of public speaking goes along with safety management. Computer knowledge, Microsoft Office at the minimum. If you look at job listings for safety managers, most of those job listings will require that the applicant be familiar with Microsoft Office. And when they say Microsoft Office, they usually mean Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. There's some other applications that go along with Microsoft Office that aren't as important, but Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, you need to develop those skills as well as you work toward becoming a safety manager. Knowledge of the regulations. I've talked about how the regulations aren't the most important part of safety management, and that's true, but it is a part of safety management. You have to have some, at least basic knowledge of the regulations, and you have to most certainly be able to find the regulations, know where to find the regulations when you need to find them. Throughout this class, especially when we talk about fall protection and some of the other specific subjects we're going to get into, I'll talk about some of the regulations safety managers should be familiar with. Being dependable, showing up to work on time, and having a good work ethic is also an important skill for safety managers or people working to become safety managers. Over here on the right is a quote that represents a philosophy that you're starting to see more and more companies go with when it comes to their new hires. More and more companies are getting away from hiring for specific skills, but they look at the person's attitude. They look at the person's background. They look at the person's past work history, those types of things. They may hire someone from accounting to be a safety manager if that accountant with that accountant's training has the right attitude, the right background, the right work ethic, they're dependable, and so on. Going along with this, hire for attitude, train for skill. They're hiring people with a degree, any degree, and training them to do the job the company needs to be done. References, work history, background inquiries are most important to these companies. All right, well, that's a quick look at safety management. What is safety management? What does a safety manager do? What are some skills and characteristics of a safety manager? If you're seriously thinking about safety management as a career, you've made a good choice. There are a lot of jobs available. The jobs that are out there pay really well, relatively speaking. I mean, you're not going to be making $150,000 a year right out of the gate, but within 2 or 3 years, you can easily be making $75,000, $80,000 a year. One student in particular, he graduated in 2019. He's already making in the low 80s, which for Oklahoma, that's really good for someone that's 24, 25 years of age to be making $80,000 to $85,000 a year at that age. So I would say on average, our graduates will start at around $55,000 a year. Some will be lower, some will be higher. A couple of examples. I got one student. He ended up not staying with this company because of the travel involved, but I believe he started right after graduation at like $90,000 a year. And starting in the 70s right after graduation is really common. But on average, it's going to be about 55. Which, if the average is 55, that means there's going to be some jobs where you're starting at 40 to 45,000 in that first position. But when you're going out and looking for jobs, and you're offered a job that only pays $45,000 a year, and you know there are better jobs out there, sometimes it's a good idea to take that $45,000 a year job to get that experience. You can always change employers. Get that first job, get your foot into the profession, get some experience, and then you can apply for other positions that may pay better, may have better benefits down the road. The average safety manager in the United States, according to the Department of Labor, earns about $100,000 a year. But again, it's not all about money. We tend to focus on money a lot, and that is important. But there's some other benefits as well that go along with this career. We have the opportunity to work in a lot of different industries. One of our graduates used to be the safety manager for the Indianapolis Colts. We have a graduate right now. She's the corporate safety manager for Chick-fil-A. Fast food businesses or the restaurant industry hire safety managers. We have graduates who work in the medical industry. And of course we have graduates that work in trucking, manufacturing, and construction. But just about every business out there has a need for safety managers. Now, in some businesses, they may not be called safety managers. There may be a different title, but in essence, what they're doing is safety management. An example of that, if you go to work for Lowe's, I believe Lowe's calls their safety managers something to do with security. And their responsibility includes worker safety, but also store security. Kind of a blending of maybe a little bit of criminal justice and a little bit of safety management. But there are a lot of opportunities out there, a lot of different industries. Also, in safety management, we are helping companies be more profitable, which we're contributing to our economy. We're doing a good thing for our company and the United States. Again, maybe some of us don't care that we're doing good for our company, but for me, that was always something I took a little pride in. When the company had a good year and we didn't have a lot of incidents, then I took a little bit of pride in that, because even if it wasn't recognized, I knew that my contributions helped the company be successful for that particular year or for that particular period. But maybe most important, the greatest benefit that goes along with a career in this field is that we are literally saving lives. About 4,500 workers a year die in the United States. That's an enormous number. It's a lot lower than it used to be. But 4,500 workers a year die in the United States. If it wasn't for safety management and the development of safety management over the years, there would be a lot more workers lose their lives in the workplace. Safety managers are out there every day saving lives. They don't carry a gun, they don't have a badge, but they are saving lives just like firefighters, police officers, and other first responders. It's an important profession. It's a profession that contributes greatly to our country and the success in our country. All right, that's all I've got in this lecture. I will see you in the next one. Let me know. Email me, text me if you have any comments or questions. I kind of miss doing the face-to-face classes because what I just rolled through were good discussion topics. This is kind of a one-way discussion with me doing all the discussion. But if you have any comments that you'd like to make, let me know. See you in the next video.